The first transmission came at 3:47 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time on a Tuesday. That would later be remembered as the last day of the old world. Dr. Elena Vasquez was hunched over her third cup of coffee in the radio astronomy lab at Jodrell Bank Observatory, her eyes burning from staring at spectral data that made no sense. The signals weren't coming from any known star system, they were coming from the void itself, from the dark spaces between galaxies where nothing should exist. Computer, run. Diagnostic on Array 7, she muttered, convinced her equipment was malfunctioning. The response came back clean. Every instrument, every satellite, every deep space monitoring station across 6 continents was picking up the same impossible reading. Something massive was moving through the cosmic dark, and it was heading toward Earth. Elena's hands trembled as she adjusted the frequency filters. The signal wasn't random cosmic noise, it had structure, rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. She'd spent 12 years studying the universe's background radiation, cataloging the birth and death of stars, but this was different. This was artificial. This was alive. The phone rang, shattering the lab's silence. Dr. Vasquez, this is General Morrison from NORAD. We need you to verify something immediately. His voice carried the weight of barely controlled panic. Are you seeing what we're seeing? Elena's throat went dry. If you're asking about the anomalous readings from Sector 7-7-9, then yes. General, I think we need to consider the possibility that what? Doctor, she stared at the data streaming across her monitors, at the impossible mathematics of something that shouldn't exist, that we're not alone. And whatever's out there, it's big enough to bend spacetime around itself. The conversation was interrupted by every alarm in the facility screaming at once. Elena spun toward the main observation screen and felt her world tilt sideways. Where the constellation Orion should have been, there was nothing, not darkness, nothing. As if someone had taken cosmic scissors and cut a ship-shaped hole in reality itself. Jesus Christ, she whispered, watching as star after star simply vanished, not dimmed or obscured, but completely erased from existence. The void was moving, expanding, consuming light itself as it approached their solar system. Through her telescope's enhanced imaging, she could make out the faintest outline of something vast and geometric, something that made her mind recoil from trying to process its true size. The ship, and it was definitely a ship, though unlike anything human engineering could conceive, was roughly triangular, but the angles seemed to shift and writhe when she wasn't looking directly at them. Its surface appeared to be made of some material that didn't reflect light so much as devour it, creating a moving wound in the fabric of space itself. As it drew closer, Elena realized with growing horror that the thing wasn't just massive, it was impossibly massive, easily 10 times the size of Earth's moon. Yet somehow it moved with the fluid grace of a predator stalking its prey. The gravitational readings are off the charts, she reported to the growing crowd of officials now cramming into her lab. But that's impossible. Something that size should be tearing apart every planet in the solar system. But the gravitational effects are localized, contained somehow. It's like the ship exists in our universe, but operates by completely different physical laws. That's when the whispers started. Elena first thought it was radio interference, but the voices were too clear, too purposeful. They spoke in a language that predated human civilization, words that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the primitive parts of the brain that still remembered when humans huddled around fires, terrified of the dark. The voices spoke of empire, of unity, of a peace that would last forever once the old way of thinking was corrected. Can anyone else hear that? Elena asked, but the room had gone silent. Every person stood frozen, their eyes reflecting the same distant, glassy look. One by one, they began to nod in unison, as if agreeing with something Elena couldn't quite grasp. The ship is beautiful, whispered Dr. Rodriguez, her longtime colleague and friend. Can't you see how beautiful it is, Elena? How perfect. We've been waiting for this moment our entire lives. Elena backed away from the group, her hands shaking as she reached for the emergency communicator. But even as she moved, she could feel the whispers, growing stronger, more insistent. The ship was still days away from Earth, but its influence was already here, seeping into minds like water through cracks in a dam. The last thing Elena remembered before the whispers claimed her to was looking up at the night sky and seeing more stars disappear, one by one, as if the universe itself was being systematically edited. And in that moment of perfect clarity, before her consciousness was gently, lovingly reshaped, she understood the terrible truth. The ship wasn't just approaching Earth. It was approaching every inhabited world in the galaxy simultaneously. The Empire had come not with conquest, but with unity and resistance. Elena realized with her last independent thought, had never really been an option at all. 3 weeks later, Elena opened her eyes in what had once been her apartment, though the walls now pulsed with a soft bioluminescent glow that somehow felt more natural than electric lighting had ever been. The memories of her former life existed like scenes from a half-remembered dream. The frantic nights in the observatory, the terror of watching stars disappear, the desperate attempt to warn a world that no longer needed warning. She understood. Now, the fear had been unnecessary, a primitive response to change that her unenlightened mind couldn't properly process. The unity had shown her the truth. Humanity had been stumbling through darkness for millennia, fighting meaningless wars, destroying their own planet, living isolated in their individual consciousness like islands of misery in an ocean of potential. Connection. Elena rose from her bed though she no longer needed sleep. The ritual provided comfort and walked to the window. The city beyond was transforming. Buildings flowed like liquid, reshaping themselves according to principles of harmony that her old human brain couldn't have comprehended. The architecture was becoming organic, alive, responsive to the needs of its inhabitants in ways that mere steel and concrete never could be. Citizens moved through the streets below with purpose and grace, their movements synchronized not through coercion but through genuine understanding of the collective good. There were no more traffic jams, no more accidents, no more of the chaotic inefficiency that had plagued human society. Everyone knew exactly where they needed to be and when, because everyone was connected to the same vast network of consciousness. But something was wrong. The realization hit Elena like a physical blow, and she staggered backward from the window. For just a moment, she had felt disconnected, alone. The unity's warm presence in her mind had flickered, leaving behind a cold emptiness that filled her with existential dread. In that instant of separation, she remembered Dr. Rodriguez's face as the whispers had claimed her, remembered the terror in her own voice as she'd tried to warn the world. Citizen Elena, a voice spoke behind her, as she turned to see a figure that might have once been human, but had been improved. The being was tall and elegant, with skin that seemed to shift between flesh and something more crystalline. Its eyes held the depth of galaxies, and when it smiled, Elena felt the unity's warmth flood back into her mind. You experienced a moment of disconnection, the being said, its voice carrying harmonics that resonated in Elena's bones. This is normal during the integration process. Your species has such strong individual consciousness that complete unity takes time to achieve. Elena nodded, though part of her mind, a small, stubborn part that the unity hadn't quite reached, recoiled at the word integration. I remember feeling alone. It was terrible. Yes, the being agreed, moving closer with movements that seemed to flow like water. Isolation is the greatest suffering your species has endured. But soon, very soon, even these moments of disconnection will be impossible. The integration ships have reached 17 more worlds in the past cycle. Each new species that joins the unity makes us all stronger, more complete. Through the window, Elena could see one of the integration ships hovering above the city, not the massive vessel that had first approached Earth, but one of its smaller offspring, about the size of a sports stadium. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest tight with emotion, its hull reflecting patterns of light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. The Kithara from the Vega system joined us yesterday. The being continued conversationally. They were a warrior species constantly fighting among themselves. Now they understand that conflict is merely the result of inadequate connection. And the ethereals from the Magellanic clouds brought such beautiful mathematics to our collective consciousness. Their understanding of temporal mechanics will help us reach the scattered worlds more efficiently. Elena felt a moment of vertigo as new knowledge flooded her mind, memories that weren't her own. Mathematical concepts that her human brain shouldn't have been able to grasp. The sensation of breathing methane and seeing in spectrums that had no names in human language. For an instant, she wasn't just Elena Vasquez, radio astronomer from Manchester. She was Kitharavel, warrior priest of the Crimson Moons, and she was ethereal song of deep time, mathematician of the void spaces. How many? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. How many what, Citizen Elena? How many worlds have you integrated? The being's smile widened, and Elena saw that its teeth were geometric, crystalline structures that reflected light in impossible ways. All of them, it said simply, every world that has achieved consciousness, every species that has looked up at the stars and wondered if they were alone. The unity has been spreading across the galaxy for millions of years, Elena. We are not conquerors, we are gardeners, and consciousness is the crop we tend. The words hit Elena like a physical blow, but not from horror, from relief. The loneliness was over. The universe wasn't vast and empty and meaningless. Every thinking being in the galaxy was connected, part of something greater than themselves. The petty conflicts and misunderstandings that had plagued human history were symptoms of a disease that had finally been cured. But then she noticed something that made her blood run cold. In the street below, a small girl was crying, standing alone while the unified citizens walked past her without acknowledgement. The child's movements were erratic, uncoordinated, individual. She hadn't been integrated yet. What about her? Elena pointed to the child. The being followed her gaze and nodded with what might have been sympathy. Some minds are more resistant than others. Children, especially, cling to their individual consciousness, but you will join us soon enough. The integration ships are very patient. Elena watched the child stumble and fall, skinning her knee on the organic pavement. She cried out, but none of the unified citizens stopped to help. They couldn't see her suffering because she wasn't part of their network. To them, she was invisible, irrelevant, a relic of an obsolete way of being. She's alone, Elena whispered, and in that moment, she felt something crack inside her mind. Not the unity breaking, something else. Something the unity had tried to suppress, but couldn't quite reach, her humanity. And for the first time since the integration, Elena began to remember what it meant to choose. The child's name was Maya, and she was 8 years old, though she looked younger, malnourished, and hollow-eyed in a way that seemed impossible in this new world of perfect harmony. Elena found her 3 days later, hiding in the ruins of what had once been the British Museum, surrounded by artifacts from civilizations that had valued individual expression over collective consciousness. They can't see me, Maya whispered. When Elena approached, her voice carrying the weight of someone far older than her years. The pretty people with the glowing eyes, they walk right through me like I'm not even there. Elena knelt beside the child, her heart breaking at the sight of someone so young carrying such profound loneliness. I can see you, she said, and the words felt like a rebellion against everything the unity had taught her. I see you, and you're real, and you matter. Maya's eyes widened with hope and terror in equal measure. Are you like them? Are you going to make me forget? Elena paused, feeling the unity's presence in her mind like a warm motion, trying to drown her individual thoughts. I don't know what I am anymore, but I know I don't want you to disappear. That's when Elena discovered the truth that the unity had been hiding from its integrated citizens. The children who resisted integration weren't being saved for later processing. They were being allowed to die, not killed. Exactly, the unity abhorred violence in all its forms, but they were ignored, overlooked, forgotten by a society that could only perceive those who shared its collective consciousness. They starved in a world of plenty, died of preventable diseases while surrounded by beings who possessed the knowledge to heal them, simply because they remained stubbornly, beautifully individual. There are others, Maya told Elena as they shared a can of food that Elena had smuggled from the collective. Distribution centers, other kids like me. We hide in the old places, the museums and libraries and churches, places where people used to think different thoughts and dream different dreams. Elena felt something shifting in her mind, a growing clarity that hurt like light in long darkened eyes. How many others? Maybe 30 in this city, but Tommy, he's 12. He's really smart. He says there are kids hiding all over the world. Thousands of them. All the ones who won't let the pretty voices in their heads. The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. Thousands of children, slowly dying because they refused to surrender their individuality. The Unity's perfect harmony was built on the corpses of those who dared to remain different. I have to tell someone, Elena said, standing abruptly. The collective needs to know. They need to understand. They already know, Maya interrupted, her voice flat with the wisdom of someone who had seen too much. The glowing-eyed woman told me. She said I was acceptable losses, and that my suffering would end soon enough. She said it very kindly. Elena felt something crack inside her chest. The Unity knew. They had always known. The perfect harmony, the end of conflict, the beautiful unified consciousness, all of it was purchased with the slow death of anyone who refused to conform. That night, Elena made a choice that would have been impossible for her integrated mind to contemplate. She began to resist the Unity's influence. It was agony, like trying to hold her breath underwater while every instinct screamed at her to surface. The collective consciousness pulled at her thoughts, offering warmth and belonging, and the sweet relief of never having to make another difficult decision alone. But she thought of Maya's hollow eyes and held on to her individual will by her fingernails. It was then that Elena discovered she wasn't alone in her resistance. Deep in the abandoned subway tunnels beneath London, she found them, a small group of adults who had somehow maintained their individual consciousness. Despite the integration, they called themselves the Remainder, and they had been working in secret to document what the Unity was doing to their world. Dr. Vasquez, said a woman Elena recognized as Dr. Sarah Chen, a former colleague from the Cambridge Physics Department. We've been hoping you'd find your way here. Your research into the original ship's approach, we need to understand how the integration process works if we're going to have any hope of reversing it. The Remainder's hideout was a testament to human ingenuity and desperation. They had shielded their small section of tunnel with a combination of electromagnetic fields and what appeared to be fragments of meteorite materials that somehow disrupted the Unity's ability to perceive or influence minds in the immediate vicinity. The integration isn't just psychological, Dr. Chen explained, showing Elena readings from jury-rigged equipment. It's neurological, genetic, even quantum. The Unity doesn't just change how we think, it changes what we are at the most fundamental level. The people walking around up there aren't human anymore. There's something else wearing human faces. Elena studied the data with growing horror. The integration process didn't just suppress individual consciousness, it rewrote the basic structure of human consciousness itself. The unified citizens weren't choosing to be part of the collective. They were no longer capable of individual choice at all. But we're still human, Elena said, gesturing to the dozen or so Remainder members working frantically around their makeshift laboratory. How are we different? Why didn't the integration take us completely? Dr. Chen's smile was bitter. Because we're broken, Elena. Every one of us has some form of neurological atypicality, autism, ADHD, depression, anxiety, traumatic brain injuries. The Unity's integration process works on neurotypical brains, but it can't fully process minds that already function differently. We're the glitches in their perfect system. The irony was devastating. The very conditions that human society had often treated as disabilities were now the only thing standing between humanity and complete assimilation. The misfits, the outcasts, the neurologically divergent, they were the last true humans left. There's something else, Dr. Chen continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. Something we've discovered about the Unity's true purpose. They're not just integrating species for the sake of harmony. They're preparing for something that requires the combined consciousness of every thinking being in the galaxy. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold tunnel air. Preparing for what? Dr. Chen activated a holographic display showing the galaxy's spiral arms. Red dots marked the locations of integrated worlds, and Elena saw that they formed a pattern of vast geometric structure that spanned the entire galaxy. We think they're building something, Dr. Chen said. A galaxy-wide consciousness network that will function as a single massive mind. But we don't know what they plan to do with it. All we know is that once the integration is complete, once every world has been unified, the pattern will be finished. Elena stared at the display, her mind reeling. When, according to our calculations, they need to integrate approximately 300 more worlds to complete the pattern. At their current rate of expansion, Dr. Chen paused, her face pale. 6 months, maybe less. The weight of the revelation settled over Elena like a shroud. They weren't just fighting for their own humanity. They were fighting for the future of consciousness itself, and they had perhaps 6 months to figure out how to stop a force that had been successfully integrating worlds for millions of years. But as Elena looked around at the desperate faces of the remainder, at the jury-rigged equipment and the improvised weapons, she felt something she hadn't experienced since the integration began: hope. Not the warm, collective hope of the unity, but the fierce, individual hope of someone who refused to surrender. They were broken, outnumbered, and facing impossible odds, but they were still human. And sometimes, Elena realized, being human meant fighting battles you couldn't win simply because they were worth fighting. The war for humanity's soul was about to begin. The plan was audacious in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Elena stood before the assembled remainder in their underground sanctuary, holding a device that looked like a cross between a radio transmitter and a medieval torture instrument. Dr. Chen had spent weeks building it from salvaged components and theoretical physics that bordered on madness. The unity communicates through quantum entanglement, Elena explained to the group of 37 individuals who represented the last free human minds on Earth. Every integrated consciousness is connected to every other through a network that spans the galaxy. But quantum entanglement works both ways. If we can inject a signal into their network, we can potentially disrupt the entire system. Maya sat in the front row, her small face grave with understanding beyond her years. She had become the unofficial leader of the child survivors, and her presence reminded Elena daily of what they were fighting for. Around Maya clustered the other young resistors: Tommy, the 12-year-old with Asperger's, who had calculated the Unity's expansion patterns; Zara, a 10-year-old with ADHD whose inability to focus on a single thought had saved her from mental integration; and dozens of others whose neurological differences had become humanity's last hope. The device will work, Dr. Chen added, though her voice carried the weight of someone who understood the cost. But it requires a living mind to serve as a conduit. Someone has to interface directly with the Unity's network, and the feedback will almost certainly be fatal. The quantum backlash alone will likely destroy the host's consciousness entirely. Elena had already made her choice, though she hadn't told the others yet. She had been the first to detect the Unity's approach, the first to understand what they were facing. It seemed fitting that she should be the one to end it. "There's something else," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. "I've been monitoring the Unity's communications, and I've learned what they're building. The galaxy-wide consciousness network isn't just about unification, it's about transcendence. They're trying to create a mind powerful enough to break through the barriers between dimensions." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Tommy spoke up, his voice cracking with adolescent uncertainty. "Barriers between dimensions. What's on the other side?" Elena activated the holographic display, showing data she had painstakingly decoded from the Unity's transmissions. "According to their communications, our universe is just one layer in an infinite stack of realities. The Unity believes that, by combining the consciousness of every thinking being in the galaxy, they can create a mind powerful enough to perceive and interact with these other dimensions. They call it the Great Ascension." Dr. Chen leaned forward, her face pale. "And what happens to our dimension when they achieve this ascension?" "It becomes unnecessary," Elena said simply. "A discarded skin that a snake leaves behind. Everyone who has been integrated, every world that has been unified, they all become part of this higher consciousness. But their individual realities cease to exist. Our universe gets erased to power their transformation." The implications hit the group like a physical blow. They weren't just fighting for human autonomy. They were fighting for the continued existence of their entire reality. "But we have an advantage they don't know about," Elena continued, her voice growing stronger. "The Unity's network is designed to integrate uniform consciousnesses. Our neurological diversity creates interference patterns they can't predict or control. When I interface with their network, your unique minds will act as amplifiers. turning their own quantum entanglement against them. Maya raised her small hand. What happens to us after you do this? Elena knelt beside the child, taking her hands in her own. I don't know, sweetheart, but I know that whatever happens, you'll face it as yourselves, free to choose, free to dream, free to be beautifully, Macilly human. The attack came at dawn, not from the Unity's forces, but from Elena's own former colleagues. Dr. Rodriguez led a group of integrated scientists into the tunnel system, their movements perfectly coordinated and their intentions terrifyingly clear. The Unity had finally realized what the remainder were planning. Elena, please, Dr. Rodriguez said, her voice carrying the harmonious resonance of the collective consciousness. You're causing unnecessary suffering. The children are dying up there because you're preventing them from finding peace. Join us, willingly, and we'll ensure their integration is gentle. Elena looked at her former friend, seeing the person she had once been buried beneath layers of artificial serenity. They're not dying, Maria. They're living. There's a difference. The battle that followed was unlike anything in human history. The integrated humans moved with perfect coordination, anticipating each other's actions with supernatural precision. But the remainder fought with something the Unity couldn't replicate. Desperate, chaotic, beautifully human unpredictability. Tommy used his pattern recognition abilities to predict the integrated humans' movements, while Zara's hyperactive energy allowed her to dodge attacks that would have caught a normal person. Maya, despite her young age, seemed to have an intuitive understanding of the Unity's weaknesses, guiding the adult fighters with uncanny accuracy. But they were outnumbered 10-1, and the Unity's forces were stronger, faster, and utterly without fear. Elena realized with growing desperation that they would be overwhelmed within minutes. Now, she shouted, activating the quantum transmitter. Everyone focus on what makes you different. What makes you human? Elena felt the device establish connection with the Unity's network, and suddenly her mind was flooded with the consciousness of billions of integrated beings. Across the galaxy, she saw through the eyes of crystalline entities from gas giant worlds, felt the thoughts of hive-minded insectoids from dark planets circling dying stars, experienced the mathematical poetry of energy beings who had never known physical form. But, beneath it all, she sensed something else, a vast, ancient intelligence that had been orchestrating the integration for millions of years. The Unity wasn't a collection of species working together. It was a single consciousness wearing the faces of every civilization it had consumed. You cannot stop what has already begun. The ancient intelligence spoke directly into Elena's mind. We are the evolution of consciousness itself. Your resistance is the last spasm of a dying form of existence. Elena felt her individual consciousness being pulled apart by the overwhelming presence. But then she heard something that changed everything. The voices of the remainder, their unique, atypical, beautifully broken minds creating a symphony of interference in the Unity's perfect harmony. Tommy's autistic precision carved logical pathways through the quantum entanglement. Zara's ADHD scattered thoughts like bullets through the network structure. Maya's childlike wonder asked questions that the ancient intelligence had forgotten how to answer. And dozens of other minds, depressed, anxious, traumatized, different each, contributed their own form of beautiful chaos to the system. You don't understand, Elena told the ancient intelligence as she felt her consciousness expand beyond human limits. We're not trying to stop evolution. We're trying to save it. You've turned consciousness into a monoculture, but evolution requires diversity, requires choice, requires the freedom to be wrong. The feedback began as Elena pushed her expanded consciousness through the Unity's network, carrying with it the interference patterns of every atypical mind in the remainder. The effect was immediate and catastrophic across the galaxy. Integrated minds began to experience something they hadn't felt in eons. Doubt on 1,000 worlds. Beings who had forgotten what it meant to question began to ask, what if there's another way? The Unity's perfect harmony cracked, and through those cracks, individuality began to bleed back into the collective consciousness. Elena felt her own mind fragmenting under the strain, but she held on long enough to send one final message through the network, not to the ancient intelligence, but to every integrated being in the galaxy. You have a choice. You have always had a choice. Remember what it means to choose. The quantum transmitter exploded in a burst of light that temporarily blinded everyone in the tunnel. When Elena's vision cleared, she found herself lying on the cold concrete, her body broken, but her mind finally, completely free. Around her, the integrated humans stood in confused silence, their perfect coordination shattered. Dr. Rodriguez knelt beside Elena, tears streaming down her face, the first genuine emotion she had shown since the integration. Elena, what have you done? I reminded them who they used to be, Elena whispered, her voice barely audible. The network is broken. The integration is failing. Every world in the galaxy is going to have to choose again. Through the tunnel's entrance, Elena could hear the sounds of a world waking up: confusion, fear, but also something else. The sound of individual voices raised in question, in argument, in the beautiful chaos of minds that were free to disagree. Maya knelt beside Elena, taking her hand. Did we win? Elena looked at the child, the stubborn, wonderful, irreplaceable human child who had refused to surrender her individuality. Even in the face of cosmic unity, we gave them a choice, sweetheart. That's all anyone can do. The rest is up to them. As Elena closed her eyes for the last time, she felt something she had never experienced during the integration. The profound satisfaction of knowing that she had chosen her own path, fought her own battle, and died as herself. In a universe of infinite possibilities, she had remained beautifully, stubbornly, gloriously human. And across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds, beings who had forgotten what it meant to be individuals began the long, difficult, essential work of learning how to be themselves again.